Across the Nevada desert the wind blew like the sigh of the earth. I stood before Lovelock, a cave dark as the throat of time. The Paiute people told that this place was once the tomb of the red-haired giants, creatures who fed on human flesh and were finally driven inside and burned alive. The rock wall still bears a handprint twice the size of a man's, a testimony carved in stone. I touched it, cold and silent, yet deep within. Something was speaking, not in words, but in memory. They say not to believe, that it is only legend, that science rejects it. But if legend is the memory of the earth and science, the memory of man, then I wish to hear them both. Fire once burned here, water once swept through, wind still tells the story, and the desert remains silent. Each element is a witness. Fire judges, water remembers, wind whispers, and the desert teaches humility. The Bible speaks of the ancient days when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men and bore children who became mighty men of renown. They called them the Nephilim. The Paiute called them Sitekar. Other cultures gave them different names, yet all spoke of the same truth, an age when man grew in stature and in pride, and when pride exceeded grace, the waters came. I am not here to prove anything. I only tell the story as one who has heard a call carried by the wind. Perhaps they truly lived. Perhaps those traces are only symbols crafted by creation to warn us. But in both cases, the lesson is the same, that greatness does not dwell in the size of the body, but in the humility before the Creator. On the night of Lovelock, I bowed my head and prayed, not asking for proof, but for eyes clear enough to see truth unbroken. For history may hide, but the earth does not forget. Bones may turn to dust, but stories still flow in the water, in the dust, in the breath of the wind. And I know the light was never lost, only forgotten. Come with me on this journey. We will follow the handprints on the stone, the echoes of the water, the bones that wait to be told. Not to argue, but to remember. For sometimes, truth does not need us to believe, only to listen. People often think that myths are only the shadows of imagination. But when the same stories are told in places half a world apart, from the Jordan Valley to the Andes, from the plains of Egypt to the Nevada desert, we must ask ourselves, did something truly happen? The Bible says clearly, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, they bore children who became mighty men of renown. They were called Nephilim, a hybrid race between divine beings and humans, tall, powerful, and ultimately seen as a threat to divine order. In the book of Enoch, they were described as giants who devoured mankind, drank blood, and ruined the earth. When God saw that wickedness had filled the world, he sent the flood to cleanse it, and the Nephilim vanished in his wrath. But if you read carefully, there is a quiet line between the waves, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men. It means that after the flood they appeared again. History, it seems, repeats itself. In the time of Moses, when the Israelites entered the promised land, they trembled at the tales of the Anakim, the descendants of the Nephilim. 10 of the 12 spies returned, saying, "We were in our own sight as grasshoppers before them." They were too great, not only in body, but in power and dominion. These beings ruled cities through fear, built walls that reached the heavens, and to the eyes of smaller men they seemed immortal. Those names, Anakim, Rephaim, Zamzumim, disappeared from maps after thousands of years. Yet the Hittites, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, and even the tribes of the Americas spoke of the same figures, beings half human and half divine, who came from the stars, who taught mankind to build towers, forge metal, and grew proud as if to replace the Creator himself. As I read the old text, I notice something strange. The closer we move to modern times, the more those names fade away, not only from Scripture, but from human memory itself. The book of Enoch was removed from the canon. The writings about giants before the flood were labeled myths. The skeletons reported in Ohio, West Virginia, and Nevada all vanished, many reports falling into the void of lost archives. I wondered then if this was not simple forgetfulness, but a deliberate silence. The Paiute speak of the Sitekar, the red-haired people who came from the sea. The Choctaw tell of the Naholo, man-eaters driven into the mountains. The Hopi remember Pahona, the fallen giant punished by the god of thunder. Each story ends with fire, water, and ash. And when the missionaries asked about their origin, the elders only said, "They were not like us, they were the children of gods who forgot heaven." These legends, stripped of symbols, share the same spiritual pattern: arrogance born from the mixing of power and flesh, of heaven and earth. When the sacred is brought down and made a tool, judgment follows. From Nephilim to Goliath, from the Anakim to the bones buried under forgotten soil, all stand as symbols of one truth, that man always seeks to exceed his limits, but in doing so, he loses the image of the one who made him. Today, we repeat the same story, not with stone, but with silicon. We build machines in our image. We touch the code of life. We open doors whose keys belong only to God. How different are we from the Nephilim, except smaller in form but equal in ambition? I remember the story of David, the shepherd boy standing before the giant, without armor, without sword, armed only with a stone and his faith. The fall of Goliath was not merely the victory of the weak, it was the reminder that no power can stand against faith placed in the right hands. Today's giants no longer carry spears, they carry fame, technology, authority, and fear. Yet the principle remains: the humble who kneel will always overcome the proud who seek to climb the throne of heaven. Perhaps those bones were real, or perhaps they were the embodiment of sin. But what I know for certain is that whenever mankind forgets heaven and crowns himself as God, the story of the Nephilim begins again. And every time the waters rise in the Bible, it is not only the flood outside, but the flood within the human heart, when sin is no longer restrained. Tonight, if you open the Bible, read again that small passage in Genesis, and ask yourself, could it be that the giants never truly vanished, but only changed form, living among us still? Hold that question, for in the next chapter we will descend into the earth, where bones, carvings, and walls still whisper the things that history tried to forget. It begins not in myth, but in dust. When archaeologists first entered the dark mouth of Lovelock Cave in the early 1900s, the smell of guano filled the air like the breath of centuries. They found sandals far too large for any normal man, fragments of bone that looked almost human but not quite, and a wall scorched black, as if the rock itself remembered fire. The reports were filed, sealed, and forgotten. But Lovelock was only one echo. Across the map of America, from the Ohio River to the California coast, old newspapers whispered the same refrain: bones too big, skulls too thick, jaws with double rows of teeth. The same words appeared again and again: giant, massive, extraordinary. In the summer of 1891, Professor Putnam from Harvard unearthed skeletons near the Serpent Mound, 7 feet tall, with skulls like helmets. In Missouri, a doctor stretched the remains of an 8-foot man across his office floor. In California, Ralph Glidden stood beside bones that dwarfed him, grinning for the camera. And in every case, the artifacts were boxed, shipped east, and never seen again. If you trace the paper trail, it reads like a confession, written in fading ink. 1872, Historical Collections of Noble County. 3 skeletons, 8 feet tall, double teeth front and back. 1894, the New York Times. Ancient graves yield giant bones. 1931, Nevada Review. 2 red-haired giants found near Lovelock. Every story ends the same way: discovery, amazement, disappearance. What is strange is not the pattern of findings, but the pattern of silence. Museums record the receipts of shipment, but not the crates. Photos exist without catalog numbers. Some reports even list the same curator, signing off on remains that supposedly turned to dust upon exposure to air. Coincidence, maybe, but as one researcher wrote in 1950, we have not been able to find the specimens in our collections, though records show they were received. That line repeats in Smithsonian correspondence like a psalm of denial. Still, the earth keeps its own records. In the caves and mounds of the Midwest, there are stones cut with marks that look like writing, not tribal, not modern. Circles interlocking, stars inside triangles, the same motif seen on tablets from Sumer and on walls in Anatolia. A few brave scholars have noticed. Most have learned not to speak too loud, because in science, Belief is currency, and heresy can end a career faster than the truth can light a match. Yet the legends persist. The Choctaw remember Nahulo, the eaters of men. The Paiute tell of Sitekar, who built rafts of reeds and sailed in from the west. The Cherokee say their ancestors fought pale giants whose eyes glowed like moonlit quartz. Even the Hopi preserve a song that says, "They rose higher than the corn and fell deeper than the roots." Maybe it's poetry, or maybe it's history written in another language, the language of memory. Some of the artifacts from those digs still survive in private hands. A femur longer than a man's arm, a skull with 2 rows of molars. They circulate quietly among collectors, each piece a forbidden relic of a story that refuses to die. If you listen closely, you'll hear a rhythm in all this discovery, suppression, rediscovery. It's the rhythm of humanity trying to remember itself. Maybe the giants were not monsters, but a chapter of creation erased because it didn't fit the lesson. Maybe they were the warning, a living parable carved in bone. When I imagine those who unearthed the bones, I picture the moment they brushed away the last grains of dust and realized what they were touching. Awe, then fear. Because the moment you see something that shouldn't exist, you are no longer safe inside the story you were taught. And once you're outside, you can't go back. The cave, the mounds, the silence, they all form a single ledger. Not written in ink, but in absence. Each missing skull is a line. Each sealed warehouse, a period. Each denied record, a tear in the page. And still the question remains, what truth is so dangerous that it must be buried again and again? Perhaps it is not the bones that threaten history, but what they prove, that humanity is not the first civilization to rise, nor the last to fall. That the flood came once, and it will come again in another form, not of water, but of revelation. So we keep digging, not with shovels, but with questions. Because somewhere beneath the layers of soil and silence, a voice is still whispering, "We were here." The air inside the Smithsonian archive was colder than I expected. Not the cold of machines, but the kind that lives in forgotten places. The guard's footsteps faded behind me, and for a long moment there was only the hum of old lights and the slow breath of dust. Rows of shelves stretched into the dark, each marked with numbers that meant nothing. Metal boxes, wooden crates, all closed, all quiet. I ran my hand across one labeled Lovelock NV 1924. The ink had bled into the wood as if the words themselves were trying to hide. I had been told that what I was looking for did not exist, that there were no records of giants, no missing bones, only rumors and misread notes. Yet here I was, standing among the records that had never been erased, surrounded by a silence that felt intentional. I opened a drawer marked Anthropology 1931 and found fragments, a sandal woven from reeds far too long for any human foot, a strip of cloth stiff with age, a shard of bone pale as candle wax. The tag read origin uncertain. I held it up to the light and thought of the desert, the cave, the handprint on the wall. These were not myths, they were memories that had lost their names. On the far wall hung old photographs, men in hats smiling beside skeletons longer than they were tall, the captions torn away. I felt the same unease those men must have felt when they brushed dust from a skull that should not have been there. Somewhere between discovery and denial, truth becomes dangerous. The letters I found confirmed it. One from 1950 spoke of oversized human remains from Nevada and Ohio, ending with a single note, storage restricted, access denied, no reason, no signature. A period, heavy and final. I closed the folder and stared at my reflection in the glass. For a moment the outline stretched, as if another shape stood behind me, taller, broader, a shadow of something that refused to die. Maybe it was only the flicker of the lights, or maybe there are truths that live in places men try hardest to forget. The silence of that room felt holy and wrong at the same time. Every crate was an altar, every label a prayer half erased. I realized that the greatest cover-up was not the hiding of bones, but the burial of wonder. Science without mystery becomes arrogance. Faith without curiosity becomes blindness, and both lose the ability to kneel. I knelt there, not as a researcher, but as a pilgrim, whispering a prayer for humility. Lord, let me stay small enough to see. When I stepped outside, the sun was setting, the windows glowing like amber. Behind me, the doors closed with a soft sigh, and I thought of the cave again, the handprint on the stone, the fire that once burned to keep the giants in. Maybe those bones will never be found. Maybe they never existed in the way we imagine. But truth has a way of surviving burial. It waits in silence. It waits in the heart of those who still ask. And somewhere in that darkness, among the rows of forgotten crates, I felt it move, not the ghosts of giants, but the quiet awakening of our oldest instinct, the need to remember what we were before we decided we already knew. History is never erased with fire, it is buried with paperwork. The story of how the Smithsonian became the keeper of silence begins not with discovery, but with opinion. In the late 1800s, John Wesley Powell led the Bureau of Ethnology. He believed that the native tribes of America were descendants of advanced people who had traded knowledge across continents. It was a beautiful idea called diffusionism, the belief that civilization flows like water touching many shores. For a brief moment, history was wide open, connected, alive, but then came Cyrus Thomas, the man who turned the river into a wall. He believed that every tribe, every mound, every artifact had to be isolated, explained within its borders. He called it isolationism, a theory that said cultures rise and die alone. To him, the native people were primitive, incapable of building the mounds or cities found in the heartland. And because he spoke from a desk inside the Smithsonian, his belief became the nation's truth. From that day forward, any discovery that hinted at cross-ocean contact or ancient advanced builders was dismissed as myth or fraud. When large bones appeared in Ohio, they were said to be animals. When red-haired mummies surfaced in Nevada, they were labeled misidentified remains. The word giant vanished from official vocabulary. The ledger of silence grew thicker than any encyclopedia. But censorship rarely calls itself by name. It hides under words like classification, verification, preservation. Behind those terms are rooms of sealed evidence, missing crates, and reports marked destroyed after review. The cover-up does not need villains, it only needs fear. Fear of ridicule, fear of losing funding, fear of rewriting everything. So the safest answer became the official one. There were no giants, no diffusion, no forgotten chapters, only coincidence, only superstition, only error. The newspapers of the 19th century tell another story. Hundreds of articles describe skeletons between 7 and 10 feet tall, found in mounds, riverbeds, caves. Each article ends with the same quiet line: the remains were sent to the Smithsonian for further study. After that, nothing. No exhibits, no photographs, no bones, only letters that admit the shipments were received, but the specimens could not be located. Some claim they crumbled to dust, others that they were mislabeled. And yet, year after year, more finds arrived, more boxes vanished. A system designed to preserve knowledge had become an engine of forgetting. It was not an evil plan, just the slow weight of human pride. Institutions fear chaos, and the discovery of giants would have been chaos. It would have challenged science, religion, and the fragile agreement that the past is already known. So the truth was folded away, layer by layer, like an artifact wrapped for protection until no one remembered what was inside. When I look at it now, I see a kind of pattern, almost sacred in its irony. The same forces that buried the giants are the ones that built the walls of our universities, our churches, even our minds. We bury what does not fit. We silence what does not flatter us. We call it order, but it is fear wearing a scholar's robe. The cover-up is not only in the basement of a museum, it is in every heart that refuses to question. Outside those halls, the earth continues to speak. Mounds still rise from the fields, aligned to stars, carved with symbols that no one has translated. Farmers still find bones in riverbanks and quietly rebury them, afraid to be called fools. Legends still circulate among the tribes, told in whispers around fires that burn like the memory of old wars. And sometimes at night, when the wind shifts over the plains, it carries a sound like footsteps too heavy for a man. If this story teaches anything, it is that truth does not die in fire or time, it dies in bureaucracy. The anatomy of a cover-up is simple. A report ignored, a file misplaced, a word removed, a map redrawn, but each small omission is a stitch in a shroud. And in the end, we look upon the body of history and think it is complete, not knowing what lies beneath. Perhaps the real secret is that the giants never needed to be hidden at all. They were always among us, not in size, but in spirit. Men who built beyond their time, who dreamed too high, who frightened the smaller minds of their age. The world has always been uncomfortable with those who stretch the limits of belief. So it does what it always has done. It buries them, calls them myths, and moves on. But silence does not erase sound. It only delays it. One day the dust will settle, the archives will open, and someone will read the forgotten names aloud. On that day, the walls of isolation will crack, and history will breathe again. Until then, the truth waits, patient as stone. Inside the crates no one wants to open. Every civilization begins with a river. Water remembers what the stones forget. It carries secrets across distances that men think impossible. For centuries we were told that the oceans were barriers, that ancient people could not cross them, that continents were separate worlds. Yet the water has its own testimony, and it whispers another story, one of crossings that defy maps and rewrite origins. The evidence is small, quiet, and undeniable. A sweet potato found in the Cook Islands, carbon dated to the year 1,500 years before Columbus, carries the same genetic signature as those grown in the valleys of Peru. Polynesian sailors either reached the Americas or the Americans reached them, and the ocean was no wall at all. Linguists trace the word for that same plant, kumara in Ecuador, kumala in Polynesia, a single syllable sailing thousands of miles. Skeptics say a potato might have floated across the Pacific, 5,000 miles of current, storm, and salt. The faithful call that coincidence. The patient call it proof. In 2007, archaeologists unearthed chicken bones in Chile, bones that spoke a language older than history. Their DNA matched fowl from the islands of Samoa and Tonga, bred across the Pacific long before European ships appeared on the horizon. Later, scientists studied living chickens in South America and found an unknown genetic marker, the same that existed on Easter Island. The conclusion was unavoidable. Polynesians had crossed the waters, and they had met another people. The exchange was not of trade or conquest, but of presence. The same way a prayer passes between two souls who do not share a tongue. Science calls it contact diffusion, but in Scripture it sounds like prophecy fulfilled. Genesis tells of man spreading upon the face of the earth, carrying the memory of Eden in their blood. The same sun that rose over Babylon rose also over the Pacific. The same stars that guided Abraham guided the voyagers who carved their gods into stone and watched them sink beneath the waves. In the flow of time, cultures drift apart, yet the water keeps them connected, invisible threads of divine design. The Smithsonian refused to see those threads. Isolationism was the doctrine. No ancient ships crossed the seas, no shared symbols between continents, no meeting of minds across the waves. Yet old maps tell a different tale. The Piri-Reis chart of 1512 shows the coasts of South America and Antarctica drawn with impossible accuracy, copied from sources far older than the Turks who inked them. Egyptian mummies hold traces of nicotine and coca leaves, plants born only in the New World. The official answer is clumsy contamination. Someone must have spilled tobacco on the wrappings. But there are too many coincidences, too many quiet witnesses. It is not pride that blinds us, it is fear. If the ancients crossed oceans, then history is not a straight road, but a spiral. It means knowledge once rose and fell, light came and went, and we are not the first to build or to forget. The cover-up of the crossings is not to protect faith or science, but to protect our illusion of progress. We do not want to know that men before us may have known more. Imagine the world before maps, when sailors followed birds instead of compasses, when stars were commandments and clouds were scripture. The Polynesians navigated by watching the rhythm of waves, feeling the pull of invisible islands beneath their canoes. The Egyptians built ships that hugged the Red Sea and perhaps slipped through currents that led beyond sight. The Mayans recorded visitors from the east who shone like the sun and vanished like storms. Across myths, the pattern repeats: strangers from the sea bringing knowledge, departing without graves. Perhaps those strangers were the remnants of the Nephilim, scattered after the flood, too few to build cities, too cursed to be forgotten. Perhaps they were only men, drawn by wind and faith. Either way, their voyages carried the same message, that the world was never divided, only our understanding of it. There is a passage in the Psalms that says, "Those who go down to the sea in ships see the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep." The sea is not a boundary but a mirror, reflecting the endless movement of creation. Each crossing is a reenactment of the beginning, when the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. When I think of those ancient sailors, I see them not as conquerors but as witnesses. They read the wind as scripture, the stars as verses. They sailed not to find land but to find reflection. And maybe, when they reached a new shore, they found others already waiting, speaking a language that felt like remembering. The Smithsonian could close its vaults, historians could dismiss the evidence, but the sea cannot lie. Every tide that reaches the sand brings with it a fragment of something older than empire. Shells, seeds, stories. The same water that touches Polynesia, touches Peru, touches Africa, touches you. So when we speak of diffusion, we are really speaking of faith, of the invisible movement of truth across impossible distances. The flood that once cleansed the earth did not end the crossings. It began them anew. Men have always followed the current of mystery, because the need to know is older than fear. And maybe that is the secret the giants knew before they fell, that nothing on this earth is truly separate. Mountains, islands, hearts, all connected beneath the same tide. The ocean keeps the covenant, carrying whispers from one world to another. Those whispers are still here, in the wind, in the salt, in the silence before dawn. Listen closely, and you will hear them say, "We have never been apart." Somewhere in the red heart of Arizona, the earth splits open like an old wound. The Grand Canyon stretches beyond sight, layer upon layer of time carved by a patient river. To tourists, it is a wonder. To geologists, it is a record. But to a few, it is a lock, hiding a door that no one is allowed to open. In 1909, a story appeared in the Arizona Gazette. It spoke of a man named Kincaid, an explorer who claimed to have found a vast underground city inside the canyon, a network of tunnels filled with mummies, hieroglyphs, and artifacts that looked Egyptian, even Asian. The report said the Smithsonian had taken control of the site, that the entrance was sealed, that the findings were shipped to Washington. The Gazette never printed a retraction, but the Smithsonian denied the entire event. For over a century, the story has hovered between myth and forbidden truth. Hikers who wander off marked trails sometimes speak of odd carvings, doorways cut too clean into sheer rock, air vents that lead nowhere. Others say military aircraft circle parts of the canyon where civilians are forbidden to fly. The restricted area is marked on maps with no explanation. Those who ask are told it is for safety. But there are whispers of patrols, of unmarked helicopters that appear when someone strays too close. The land itself feels guarded, like a secret kept by the desert. If the story of Kincaid is fiction, it is a fiction that refuses to die. The details are too precise, the tone too factual. It mentions tunnels wide enough for freight trains, statues of deities foreign to North America, even a stone tablet inscribed with a serpent coiling around the Sunday. Every element mirrors the language of Genesis, of ancient Egypt, of Sumer, perhaps coincidence, perhaps echo. But what makes it powerful is what followed: nothing. No further investigation, no acknowledgement, only silence thick enough to become legend. Those who search the archives find pages missing, letters with names erased. The Smithsonian insists it has no record of any explorer named Kincaid in its employ. Yet the Gazette described his report with the detail of an official release. It even quoted a Professor Jordan of the Smithsonian, who later also vanished from institutional history. The pattern repeats: discovery, followed by disappearance. Beyond the mystery of one article lies a deeper question. Why would such a discovery be denied? The answer is not simple. It is the same fear that buried the giants, that erased diffusionism. The idea that civilizations across the oceans shared a common origin threatens the entire structure of accepted history. It would mean that Egypt and the Americas were branches of the same root. That knowledge once flowed freely before the flood separated the lands. Such an admission would rewrite more than textbooks, it would rewrite identity. Some geologists admit that the lower layers of the canyon contain anomalies, structures that do not fit the pattern of natural erosion. Cavities arranged like chambers, perfect 90-degree angles where none should exist. Satellite imaging shows shapes hidden by shadows, doorways too uniform to be accidents. Yet whenever someone requests access, permits are delayed, funding denied. The canyon remains locked, its silence guarded by bureaucracy. There is a strange symmetry in that silence. The ancients built tombs to keep the living out and the dead within. Now modern institutions do the same, but what they entomb is knowledge. We live in an age that worships data but fears revelation. The canyon stands as a monument to that fear, a cathedral of stone whose altar is empty because the priests have hidden what was once sacred. Some explorers claim that the underground passages connect to others, stretching across the continent, remnants of a civilization older than the flood. The Hopi speak of the ant people who sheltered their ancestors beneath the earth during the time of fire and water. When they emerged, they built cities according to the stars, remembering the tunnels as wombs of rebirth. The same story appears in Sumer, in Egypt, in the Andes. Always there is a descent, a hiding, and a return. Perhaps the canyon is another chapter of that cycle, a threshold between worlds, sealed until we are ready to understand. There is a verse in Isaiah, "And thou shalt be brought down, and shalt speak out of the ground, and thy speech shall be low out of the dust." The prophets knew that truth buried in earth will one day speak again. Maybe that is what the Colorado River is doing, carving away the silence inch by inch, exposing what men tried to hide. Every layer of rock it cuts through is a page turning slowly, and one day it will reach the line that says, "This is where the story begins again." If the Grand Canyon truly hides an ancient city, it would not surprise me. The earth has always been a keeper of memory. When we deny its stories, we deny our own. Whether those tunnels exist or not, the greater mystery is why we are forbidden to look. Knowledge should not need gates, yet we have built them around everything that might challenge our comfort. The canyon waits, patient as stone, indifferent to our denials. At dusk, when the light fades and the walls glow crimson, the silence feels alive. You can almost hear the heartbeat of the earth, steady and deep. It is as if the land itself remembers a time when gods walked among men and left their shadows in rock. The door may be sealed, but the call remains. One day someone will listen long enough, dig deep enough, and the stone will answer. Until then, the canyon stands as a question carved by water, a question no one dares to finish. What lies behind the door that does not open? Perhaps not treasure, not proof, but a mirror. And when we finally look through it, we might see not giants, not gods, but ourselves, and realize that the true secret of the canyon is not what it hides, but what we have refused to see. I entered the desert just as the sun disappeared. The red earth still held the heat of the day, while the sky above was cold and deep like the surface of another ocean. The wind carried the scent of dust and iron, the smell of time, the scent of memories that had lost their names. I did not come here to find proof, I came to listen. When night descended, the world became stiller than breath, and in that silence, sometimes there are answers that need no words. I pitched my tent beside a large rock shaped like an upturned hand, its fingers pointing west. The Paiute called this place the back of the giant. They said that on nights without a moon, if you press your ear to the ground, you can hear footsteps moving beneath the earth, heavy, slow, and far away. I once laughed at that story, but tonight, as the wind changed and the desert fell utterly silent, I was no longer certain. The oil lamp cast a faint yellow light upon the sand, each grain like a fallen star. From my pocket, I took a small white fragment of bone found near Lovelock, no larger than a finger. so old that touching it felt like touching time itself. I did not know whether it belonged to a man or a beast, only that it made my heart grow heavy. There was something in it that made me want to kneel without knowing why. I placed the bone in the center of the small ring of stones and whispered, not a prayer, but a question. How did you live, and why were you forgotten? The wind answered with a long howl, then fell still. The sky sank like a purple curtain, stars thickened, and among them I thought I saw faint streaks of light, like 1,000 eyes gazing down. I remembered the stories, the Nephilim, the Anakim, those who once walked the earth and made men tremble. If they truly lived, perhaps they too once looked up at this same sky, wondering what comes after strength is gone. I sat there for a long time, until I realized that what I felt was not fear of the darkness, but fear of my own thoughts. If those giants were not myths, if they were the result of a forbidden union, then they were the very image of arrogance, and I understood that sin still lives, only changing form. Today, mankind builds cities of steel, creates intellect out of code, replicates life in glass, repeating the same old story, reaching again for the power of the Creator. A gust of wind swept through, the lamp went out, and only the light of the sky remained. I lay down and felt the earth beneath me breathe. In the space between waking and sleep, I saw a figure, tall and lean, with hair red as fire, standing at the edge of the light. It did not threaten, did not move, only stood there like a keeper of memory. When I tried to speak, it vanished into the wind. I opened my eyes to silence, but I knew I had not dreamed. Perhaps I had been given a reminder that great things never truly disappear. They only wait for someone small enough to see them. I sat up and wrote a few lines in my journal. No measurements, no coordinates, only these words: desert night, footsteps beneath the ground. Then I prayed not for truth to be revealed, but for the humility to receive it. I said, Lord, do not let me become a giant in pride. Let me keep the stature of one who seeks, not one who judges. The wind rose again, this time soft and warm. I felt as though someone had passed by, not a person, not a shadow, only a presence. The ground trembled faintly like a sigh, and I knew that tonight someone had heard my prayer. Near dawn, when the first light touched the sand, everything returned to normal, yet something in me had changed. I understood that true searching does not happen in books or dig sites, but in the desert of the soul, where one must face the truth about oneself. When I left, the sun had risen, gold as fire and cold as metal. I looked back. The hand-shaped rock was still there, its finger still pointing west, toward where the Paiute said the final cave lay unopened. I smiled. It no longer needed to be opened, for I knew the door was not in the stone, but in the heart of one learning to listen. And I heard, clearly, the wind passing by with a blessing. Remember, the light is never lost. It only waits for those who dare to look into the dark. In every age, truth walks through 4 gates before it reaches the world. The first is the gate of ridicule, where it is laughed at. The second is the gate of marginalization, where it is ignored. The third is the gate of attack, where it is condemned. And the fourth, the final gate, is silence, where it is erased. What we call history is only what survives those gates. Everything else remains outside, waiting. The story of the giants, the forbidden cities, the ancient crossings, all have walked that same path. Each time a discovery threatens the comfort of certainty, the same sequence unfolds, not by conspiracy, but by instinct. The world protects itself from wonder the way the body protects itself from pain. When Graham Hancock released his series about forgotten civilizations, the critics called it dangerous, as if an idea could wound someone. The Guardian wrote that it was the most dangerous show on television, not because it lied, but because it asked questions no one wanted to face. Soon the labels appeared: conspiracy, pseudo-history, fringe. When ridicule failed, marginalization began. The experts spoke of credentials, of peer review, of authority. Then came the attacks. They called it racist, as if the curiosity of one man threatened the moral fabric of the world. And finally came silence, The algorithms buried his voice beneath 1,000 louder ones until it was almost as if he had never spoken. This is how the gates work. Clean, efficient, almost invisible. The media plays its part, not always with malice, but with obedience. Its language is ritual, the words repeated until they become law. Dangerous, discredited, debunked. These are the modern charms that keep the demons of doubt away. Yet beneath that noise, something else moves, the slow awakening of people who have begun to see the pattern. They read the old reports, they follow the missing files, they feel the weight of omission. Each discovery becomes a small act of rebellion against the silence. Science was never meant to be a fortress. It was born as a voyage, a faith in evidence and observation. But over centuries it has become its own priesthood, guarding doctrine with the same fear that once burned heretics. Religion, too, has its walls, built not of stone but of interpretation. Between them lies the narrow road where the seeker walks, alone, carrying both lamp and question. The seeker is ridiculed, ignored, attacked, and finally silenced. Yet the path remains, because the gates are not made of iron, they are made of fear, and fear can be walked through. In the archives of the Smithsonian, in the red canyons of Arizona, in the quiet of the desert night, the pattern repeats. Ridicule, marginalization, attack, silence, each gate harder to pass than the last. But truth is stubborn. It slips through cracks, rides on whispers, hides in the lines of old maps and forgotten psalms. It waits for the right eyes, the right hands, the right moment. It cannot be destroyed, only delayed. There is a verse that says, "Nothing is hidden that will not be revealed, nor secret that will not be made known." The four gates are not there to stop truth, but to test those who seek it. Many turn back at the first laughter, others at the first wound. Only a few reach the silence and learn that silence itself is not the end, it is the beginning. For in silence, truth speaks without words. Look around, and you will see the same pattern in every field, in science, in history, in faith, even in your own heart. New understanding always begins as heresy. Every prophet was called mad before he was called holy. Every revelation was once a rumor. Every miracle was once impossible. The gates are the same because humanity is the same. We fear what changes us. When I watch the world argue over stories of giants and lost civilizations, I no longer ask whether they are real. I ask what kind of fear keeps us from even looking. The laughter, the dismissal, the anger, they are symptoms of the same disease, the dread of being small. Yet it is only the small who can pass through the gates. Giants do not fit. The fourth gate, the silence, is not guarded by men, but by comfort. To step beyond it is to lose the world you knew. You will not be applauded there. You will not be safe. But beyond that gate is where all discoveries live, where the ancient voices still echo. The cave, the mound, the canyon, the sea, all speak the same word, remember. If you wish to follow truth, you must walk quietly. Let ridicule pass like wind. Let rejection fall like rain. Let attack burn and fade. Then enter the silence, not to shout, but to listen. For only in that stillness will you hear what history has tried to forget, that light was never lost. It was only waiting for someone to stop talking long enough to see it. The four gates stand in every mind, not just in museums or universities. And the first step through them is simple. You close your mouth, you open your eyes, and you listen. The first time the earth sang was before man had a name. It sang in vibration, in pressure, in light that moved through stone. Every culture that ever touched the soil heard it and tried to answer back. They built circles, towers, mounds, pyramids, cathedrals, all tuned to the same hidden frequency. Some say these stones were only monuments, but others, the ones who listened, said they were instruments. The earth itself turned into prayer. When the wind passes through Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the oldest temple known, the pillars hum. The sound is low, almost inaudible, yet it stirs the chest like a heartbeat. Those stones were carved 12,000 years ago, long before the first city, before writing, before history had a script. They were buried carefully, not destroyed. It was as if the builders knew that one day the world would forget, and that the song must be preserved beneath the dust until we were ready to hear it again. When archaeologists uncovered the site, they expected simple tools, crude huts, the remains of hunters. Instead, they found architecture, alignment, purpose. The stones weigh tons, each placed with care beyond survival. No graves, no homes, no sign of ordinary life, only worship. The carvings are of animals now extinct, of stars, of hands lifted toward the sky. There is no idol there, no god sculpted in flesh, only symbols, only sound. The ancients did not come to ask, they came to remember. Before Göbekli Tepe, the oldest known civilization was Sumer, 5,000 years younger. Its priests taught that knowledge came from the gods, from beings who descended when the heavens opened. Yet here in Turkey, the timeline fractures. The builders of Göbekli Tepe already knew the sky, already knew the rhythm of creation. They were not primitives waiting for wisdom. They were witnesses returning from a flood. Farther west lies Bonkuklu Tala, another site older than legend. There they found walls, irrigation channels, and a sewer system. People who should have been cave dwellers were instead engineers. The stones fit together so precisely that even time could not slip between them. What does it mean when the oldest people we can find were already advanced, already spiritual, already aware of geometry and sound? It means that progress is not a straight climb, it is a circle. It means that we have risen before and fallen before. For centuries we thought we were the beginning, that history started with us. Then the earth sang again, through these stones, and the melody did not match our tune. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe and Bonkuklu Tala shattered the myth of linear civilization. They whisper of a memory older than flood, older than Babel, a time when the language of stone and the language of spirit were one. The carvings on the pillars depict vultures carrying spheres, snakes coiling around men, and foxes running toward the north. To archaeologists, these are symbols of death and season. To mystics, they are messages. Constellations carved in stone, maps of the heavens preserved by hands that had seen the sky burn. When the great flood came, it wiped out cities and memory alike. But the builders buried their song so that one day it could be found. And now it has. The stones sing not in sound but in resonance. Stand between them and you feel it. A vibration under the skin, like being inside a bell that never stops ringing. The ancients used that resonance to pray. They did not speak their petitions, they lived them. The frequency was their language, and the earth answered. Today we build machines that hum with the same pitch, not knowing we are imitating temples. Science now admits that the builders of Göbekli Tepe understood acoustics, astronomy, and mathematics beyond their supposed era. Yet the textbooks still call them primitive. It is easier to downgrade the past than to upgrade our humility. The stones challenge us because they remind us that light existed before our lamps, that wisdom can precede progress, that silence can teach more than words. When I walked among those pillars, I could feel time bending. The air was thick, as if filled with memory. The ground seemed alive, pulsing softly beneath my feet. It was not imagination. It was history breathing. I placed my hand on one of the carvings, a figure of a crane, and felt warmth as though the stone had a pulse. Maybe it was the sun. Maybe it was something else. In that moment, I understood that we have never been alone in our seeking. Every age builds its altars, and every altar waits to be rediscovered. The same song echoes in the great pyramids in Stonehenge, in the cathedrals that rise like forests of stone, different languages, same harmony. The ancients tuned their monuments to the earth's hum, to the note that holds the world together. We have forgotten the note, but the stones have not. They sing it still, through wind and shadow, waiting for ears unafraid of wonder. Perhaps that is why the story of the giants persists. They were the builders of resonance, the keepers of frequency. When pride consumed them, the song fell silent. Yet the stones remember, and when the right vibration touches them, they answer. That is what happened when the archaeologists unearthed Göbekli Tepe. The earth remembered its own voice. Every discovery we make is the echo of something ancient calling us back. The stones that sing do not ask us to worship them. They ask us to listen. They remind us that creation is not over, that revelation is not finished, that God still speaks through the material he made. We have only to be still long enough to hear the tone beneath the noise. When I left the site, the sun was low, and the pillars cast long shadows like fingers reaching toward heaven. The wind moved through them and made a sound faint and hollow, almost like words. I could not understand it, but I felt it, deep and steady, the same rhythm as my heartbeat. The stones were alive. And I knew then that faith and science are not enemies, they are verses of the same hymn. If one day the earth gave up its secrets and the bones of the giants rose again into the light, what would we do? Would we rewrite the books, or would we hide them once more? Every truth carries a cost, and every revelation demands humility. If the remains of the Nephilim, the Anakim, the long-forgotten ones, were placed before us, the question would not be about their height or age, but about ours. How tall is our faith? How small is our pride? The discovery would not change God, it would change us, and that is why the world fears it. Imagine the museum doors opening, the crates unlabeled for a century revealed, the skulls larger than any man, the bones thick as oak branches. The headlines would shout, the crowds would gather, and the arguments would begin. Scientists would measure and argue over genetics. Theologians would debate whether the flood truly erased the offspring of heaven and earth, and the rest of us would look on, silent, sensing something older than explanation. Because deep inside, we already know that the story was never about bones, it was about memory, about the recurring cycle of pride and judgment, about what happens when man forgets his place in creation. The giants, if they return, will not march across the plains or roar from mountains. They will rise in our minds, in the questions we tried not to ask. Why were we so quick to call myth what we could not measure? Why did we let knowledge become a weapon against wonder? The bones would only be mirrors, reflecting the enormity of what we have denied. We have always feared the past, because it reminds us that we are not masters but heirs. If the bones return, the churches will tremble before the same question that silenced Job. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? It is not a rebuke, but a reminder that mystery is not our enemy. Faith was never meant to end curiosity. It was meant to guide it. To see the skeleton of a giant is to see a parable carved in calcium, a warning that every tower built on arrogance will fall. The flood was not the last judgment. It was the first lesson. History would have to bend. The theory of isolated civilizations would crumble. The old maps with their blank spaces marked, "Here be dragons," would seem honest compared to our modern certainty. For we too have our dragons. We simply call them data we ignore. The bones would make us face the truth that knowledge has always been circular. We rise, we forget, we fall, we remember. The ancients knew this. That is why they buried their wisdom in stone and song, safe from fire, safe from us. If the bones return, it would not end science, it would purify it. The real scientist, like the real believer, is a humble man. He does not demand that the universe fit his theory. He listens until it speaks. The bones would not contradict evolution. They would expand it, reminding us that creation is broader than any model, that time is deeper than our calendars. Perhaps they would show that man has been remade more than once, that the flood was not a punishment but a reset, a mercy disguised as ruin. Imagine the lessons the bones would teach. That power without conscience becomes a curse. That flesh can grow enormous while spirit withers. That size and wisdom are not the same. The Nephilim fell because they forgot that worship and work are the same word. They served themselves instead of the Creator, and so the weight of their pride crushed them. When the last of them sank beneath the flood, the water carried not just their bodies but their warning. If the bones return, perhaps we will finally understand that every myth was memory. The serpent, the tower, the flood, the giants, all fragments of a single revelation, repeated in symbols so we would not lose it. We have spent centuries translating God into science, when what we needed was to translate science back into awe. The return of the giants would not destroy faith. It would make it visible again. Faith is not believing without evidence, it is recognizing evidence as sacred. But the world may not be ready. Truth too heavy for weak hearts becomes another flood. The archives may open, but only those who have learned humility will endure what they see. Because when the bones rise, they will not just expose ancient flesh, they will expose modern vanity. Every empire, every institution, every intellect built on denial will be shaken. The bones will ask one question: have you learned to listen yet? And if we answer yes, if we kneel before what we once mocked, then the return will not be a threat but a rebirth. The bones will not stand to rule us. They will lie down to teach us. They will remind us that we too are dust and breath, bound by the same spirit that once moved over the waters. Perhaps that is the final prophecy, that the bones of the giants will return when mankind grows humble enough to bear their weight, not as fossils in glass, but as symbols restored to meaning. Then the flood will no longer be a story of wrath, but of cleansing. Then the giants will no longer be monsters, but ancestors, fallen yet forgiven. And when that day comes, the museums will not hold them, the temples will. Children will touch the bones and not fear. Scholars will study and not scoff. The world will look up again at the heavens and remember that it too was once a child, small under a vast sky, learning to speak the language of wonder. The bones will return, and when they do, may we be ready not to explain them, but to listen to what they have been saying since the beginning, that we were never meant to be giants of power, only giants of faith. Bạn có muốn tôi viết tiếp phần 12, dư âm của đá và nước, phần kết tinh nhận thức, kể ở ngôi thứ nhất, khoảng 900 từ không? I returned to where the journey began, before the mouth of Lovelock Cave, where the wind carried the breath of centuries long asleep. Morning had just broken, and the first light fell upon the cliff like the greeting of God, gentle and straight, shining upon the giant handprint on the wall. I placed my hand upon it, my small hand lost within the palm of stone. I did not know who left it there, only that each time I touched it, my heart heard an ancient sound, like the heartbeat of the earth. Perhaps it was the voice of water, of stone, of things that never truly vanish. Every story I have told, from the caves of Nevada to the rivers of Ohio, from the fields of the Paiute to the stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe, all seem like fragments of memory fallen from the hand of mankind. I once thought I was searching for proof, but now I know I was searching for humility. Each step upon the ground, each grain of dust that clings to the skin, is a lesson about humanity's place in the universe. We are small enough to disappear, yet great enough to be called by name, precious enough to be made from the breath of God. I sat down and looked west, where the sun was about to rise, and I remembered everything. The vanished bones, the denials, the debates, all were like wind sweeping over the surface of sand. But beneath, the water still flowed, quiet and faithful. Truth is like that. It does not need to win arguments, it only needs to wait. When water moves through stone, the stone changes, not in a day, but in 1,000 years. Perhaps God is the same, never in haste, for he knows that in the end, all things return to their source. I once feared what I could not explain. Now I fear the opposite, a world with no room for mystery. We have replaced God with theory, prayer with data, wonder with certainty. But that night in the desert taught me that what cannot be understood is not the enemy of faith, it is the place where faith is born. If every question already had an answer, what need would there be for belief? I closed my eyes and listened to the wind passing by like the sigh of the earth. I thought of the giants, not as creatures, but as symbols. They are the mirror of man's arrogance, but also the proof of the Creator's mercy. For even when they were burned in caves and swept away by floods, their story remained. Nothing sacred ever truly dies. It only changes form, hiding itself in the memory of stone, in the breath of water, in the dream of one who knows how to listen. I felt small and at peace. I no longer wanted to prove or argue, only to understand. I realized that the secrets of the Bible are not about how many giants once lived, but why we were told about them. Every story of destruction is a reminder of mercy. The flood was not just punishment, it was a chance to begin again, to wash away pride, to see the light once more. When I opened my eyes, the sun was high, its rays shining directly upon the cliff where the handprint glowed like fire. I did not know if it was real or illusion, But I knew I was being reminded that the light is never lost, only forgotten. The stories I tell, the places I go, are the journey of one seeking the memory of light. I stood, brushed the sand from my clothes, and looked around. The desert was vast and silent, yet not lonely. I knew that somewhere beneath this earth, fragments of bones, stones, and drops of water were still waiting until mankind is small enough to see, still enough to hear, brave enough to remember. I smiled and whispered, Lord, if I have forgotten your light, teach me to remember it again through stone and water. Then I turned away. Behind me the wind rose, blowing through the cave and forming a deep, lingering sound like a song. I knew it was a farewell. I did not need to look back, for I understood that this journey was never to find the giants, but to remember the one greater than them all. And in that moment I knew I had heard the first song of the earth, the song of truth, of memory, of faith, and of love that never fades. The journey ended in silence, but within that silence there was the echo of stone and the whisper of water telling me that the light was never lost. It only waits to be called home by a heart that knows how to kneel.